Hi there, I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut FLEXpectations. We're here every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. to look ahead to the events in the world of boxing, of course. And this week I wanted to talk a little bit about Canelo Alvarez, the biggest superstar in the sport, my pick, and a lot of other people's for the pound-for-pound #1. In his last fight, we saw him, of course, comprehensively defeat the consensus #1 at 168 pounds, Callum Smith, to take his WBA super title and to capture the vacant WBC belt, which he will now defend against his mandatory challenger. A lot of people up in arms that Avni Yildirim, last seen by many of us getting knocked out early by Chris Eubank Jr., is the man in pole position, the mandatory challenger for the WBC. But it's now been confirmed that Canelo will fight Yildirim next on February the 27th in Miami at the Hard Rock Stadium, home, of course, to the Miami Dolphins, who NFL fans will know had a better than expected season. Season's still ongoing in the playoffs, of course, but the Dolphins didn't make it quite that far, narrowly missing out on a playoff spot. But it does mean, let's look at the positives, fans will be allowed in, up to the capacity allowed for that stadium, which is a good thing. And it also means Canelo, the biggest star in the sport, is likely to fight 3 times this year instead of the 2 that we have become used to for him and most of the current era's top fighters. February, and then those Mexican holiday dates that he usually takes in May and September. They obviously feel that Yildirim shouldn't prove too taxing a challenge in February. That's probably fair. I mean, it's fair to say we didn't see the best of Yildirim, German-based Turk, in the fight with Eubank Jr. He decided to trade early on and got wiped out by the faster hands of the Brit. But, you know, if he'd have been given more time, not taken so many risks early and worked his way into the fight, it could have been a lot closer. We'll never know. Yildirim, previous to that, had looked a sturdy and capable operator, albeit nothing particularly special. And Canelo, a lot of people saying, oh, well, if Eubank Jr. did that to him, what's Canelo going to do? But Canelo's not the same fighter. Canelo's a bit more measured, fights in bursts. But believe me, if he believes early on that his opponent is substandard compared to him and inferior quality, again, you know, the likes of James Kirkland, Rocky Fielding, he'll have no hesitation in going to get them out of there. So it'll all depend on how the early rounds stack up. But you can't see anything but a Canelo victory inside the distance. And then we move on to May. Now, it's being reported that the Yildirim fight will be shown on DAZN in the US and the UK and most markets outside of Mexico, which is interesting. Obviously, Canelo was with DAZN when he had his previous promotional deal with Golden Boy. He's now a promotional free agent. Worked with Eddie Hearn, Matchroom Boxing USA and DAZN for the Callum Smith fight. And it seems that relationship is continuing. But rumours abound that the Yildirim deal is part of a wider 2-fight agreement that includes the May date. And that May date will come against the WBO champion Joe Saunders, who is, of course, with Matchroom and DAZN outside of the UK. Which is interesting. Very clever move from Canelo. It just shows how not only did he improve and supplant Floyd Mayweather, the only man to defeat him, of course, as the sport's top attraction, he also inherited his mantle as the smartest or shrewdest businessman in boxing, because no one really wanted to pay for the Yildirim fight. It's not an inspiring fight by any means. It's not a fight anyone except perhaps Yildirim and the WBC wanted. And yet Canelo, by leveraging the May date, has managed to get some cash, considerable cash, I believe, in for the Yildirim fight. So fair play to him for using his status as the world top star to become more active and to get the most amount of money he can for a fight that, as I said, isn't the most inspiring and has a pretty predictable result. So if those reports are to be believed, the fight with Joe Saunders, obviously close last May and scuppered by the pandemic and then scuppered once again when Saunders was unable to get ready in a short space of time and for not brilliant money, it has to be said, and no one's criticising him for that. Looks set for this May, Cinco de Mayo weekend. But the secondary option being reported is the IBF champion, Caleb Plant. Like Saunders, unbeaten. Like Saunders, very slick. Orthodox, though, rather than southpaw. Taller, longer fighter than Saunders. And probably a bigger puncher as well, although it's debatable. I spoke to Caleb Plant actually last night. That interview will be out, I think, either tomorrow or Saturday, so you can have a look at that. And he seems pretty certain he'll be fighting Canelo this year, but not entirely convinced that it will be in May. Just reading between the lines, it seemed more likely for him, assuming he keeps winning in between, that it will be September. He has got his own fight lined up on the 30th of January, I think it is, against Caleb Truax, the battle to decide the #1 Caleb in boxing, I guess. It's a bit of a grudge match, but again, most people predicting that Plant will retain his title. So it could be him, it could be Saunders in May. Saunders most likely because of that 2-fight deal that we talked about with DAZN. Because surely if Canelo was more likely to fight Caleb Plant, who's a Premier Boxing Champion, Al Heyman, PBC fighter, in May, then the 2-fight deal would have been done with PBC, and the February fight against Avni Yildirim would be taking place on Fox or Showtime in the US, who are affiliated with PBC and broadcast their events. So with all that in mind, it seems Saunders is the front runner. But then if he fails to accept the fight, because we don't know, the deal with DAZN might not have gone through Saunders. Maybe they'll, not sure what the machinations there are. But if Saunders for any reason can't take that fight, then it's being reported that Plant is in the running. And I guess the key question is for you guys and for me on this vlog, who would we rather see Canelo fight? Both reigning world champions, both unbeaten, both largely untested as well. And that's no disrespect to either of them. But, Saunders' biggest test was that dominant win over David Lemieux, who we've seen exposed in other fights. And Caleb Plant's biggest win to date was over Jose Uzcategui, who, again, good fighter, very talented, was expected to win, I think, by most people ahead of Plant. I think he was a narrow favourite going into the fight, but not an elite level fighter. We haven't seen either of these guys beat or even take on an elite level fighter as yet. It'll be a big step up from their previous level of competition to go against Canelo, albeit both are very talented. Caleb Plant, as I say, maybe a slightly bigger puncher, also longer, rangier. But Saunders has the better footwork. He's slicker. He's got the faster hands, I would say. And more kind of veteran savvy. He's more experienced, even though he hasn't stepped up against that highest level of competition. He's got veteran tricks. He was a better amateur, certainly, than Caleb Plant. Olympian, very, very experienced in international competition in the unpaid code. I think all those things could cause Canelo problems, but there is the sneaking concern with Billy Joe that he's kind of missed the boat a little bit, that his prime perhaps was 2 or 3 years ago. We won't know until we see him up against the Canelo. He looked, as good as ever in outpointing Martin Murray not that long ago, but this was a Martin Murray towards the tail end of his career. Indeed, he retired soon after the lopsided defeat. So then, is Billy Joe Saunders still in the prime of his career? I mean, he's relatively fresh. He hasn't fought that often in the past few years. He certainly seems rejuvenated under trainer Mark Tibbs at the moment, and surrounded by young prospects in that Tibbs camp as well, which can only help to motivate. And we know that his problems with discipline have always been outside the ring, with his diet and sometimes his behaviour and so on. Inside the gym, he's always trained incredibly hard. And if he's still the talent he certainly seemed to be a couple of years ago, then you've got to feel that he will give Canelo a really tough challenge. Caleb Plant, on the other hand, he's still rising, he's still improving. He's earlier on in his career, despite being a reigning world champion. He seems to be getting a bit better with every fight. His profile's growing. And the fact that that's the case also adds fuel to the fire that he'll be in September rather than May. Because, there's still room for him to grow as an attraction before that fight takes place. Whereas Billy Joe Saunders, even though he's not from the US like Plant, is the more established name at this point. But Plant's still got improvement in him. He's young, he's fresh, he's hungry. I think all those things are exciting prospects to go up against Canelo, who's obviously been there, seen it and done it. But I guess overall, and obviously I want you guys to comment below who you'd rather see him fight in May out of Saunders and Plant. But I guess overall, the positives to grasp from this, for all the people who don't really like the Yildirim fight, not only does it mean that Canelo's going to fight hopefully 3 times this year, it also means he could fight Saunders and Plant in May and September, 2 of the very top super middleweights in the world that we'd like to see him fight. And he said before the last fight against Callum Smith, his short-term goal was to unify all the super middleweight titles. And if he defeats Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant in quick succession, he will have done that in the space of, less than a calendar year. So you'd have to give him huge credit for that. If he's not already your pound-for-pound number one, surely that would see him take that position for even the most hard critics out there. But yeah, the fact that the sport's biggest star is going to fight 3 times this year, and in 2 of them against fellow world champions, I don't see how we can complain about that. That's got to be good news, especially in these pandemic-afflicted times. Really appreciate your time, as always. Please leave your comments below. Always appreciate those. And I will see you all on Monday, hopefully, not hopefully from my point. I mean, I hope you tune in. I'll definitely be here for Reflections on Monday at 4:30 p.m. and then the next FLEXpectations next Thursday at the same time. Really appreciate it. I say appreciate it a lot, but I do. And I'll see you all soon. Cheers.